1971, when Memorial Day moved to Mondays from its original date of May 30th, what was once a solemn observance has now become for many people the first big getaway weekend of the summer. But this is also a time for remembering the men and women who lost their lives in war. Hollywood has been remembering since 1915, when the first war movie, Birth of a Nation, was produced. Many of us didn't fight in the wars of our time, but that's not to say we didn't experience them in some way. In America, everyone who has been to the movies certainly has seen the sum of that glory and sometimes the pain.
All my life, I've wanted to lead a lot of men in a desperate battle. Now I'm going to do it.
Lock and load!
In a wartime situation, particularly World War II, where the country was literally fighting for its survival, Hollywood saw itself as part of the war effort by turning out, I hate to use the word propaganda, but certainly pro-American films which explained why we were fighting, showed how bad the enemy was. You have in the movie Air Force the great climactic battle, which most people think was Midway, but was filmed months before the battle on a special effects lake. All the Japanese ships sink with the flags waving. The films of the war, nevertheless, were inspiring the people. You have the Fighting Sullivans, for example, the 5 brothers that go off to the Navy and they all die. And at the end of the movie, they march off to heaven, you know, with the music blaring, and this was a noble thing. As the war goes on and finally you start to get the historical events, you make movies like 30 Seconds Over Tokyo.
The movie also was designed to inspire Americans, and the military made sure it did. In this and 30 movies made during World War II alone, Hollywood directors were, in fact, given all the U.S. troops, planes, ships, whatever was needed, as long as their stories were favorable to the war effort.
And they learned very early on, really during World War I, that if they assist filmmakers, they will get their image on the screen, and they discovered it did help recruiting. I've always believed the Marines have done the best job, and in the 20s, the other services said we better learn from the Marines because they're getting ahead of us on this.
If I were to rate the World War II films, or the films which were made about World War II, I think that I'd have to give high marks, very high marks, to Sands of Iwo Jima with John Wayne as being really the Marine Corps film of World War II. The story is not completely creditable, but still it was John Wayne, the Marine image, the handsome, gallant sergeant carrying through and then dying heroically.
In fact, I never felt so good in my life. I want a cigarette.
Exactly 30 years later, Hollywood was still caught up in the heroism of World War II. Charlton Heston.
My last shot in Midway was a real shot of a real plane really exploding on the deck of the Lexington. And it's nasty. These guys were the ones that did it. I choke up when I speak of it. When they were there, the guys that were on the ground in those planes, on those ships, when nobody else was, and nobody else cared about it. To be part of it, of reenacting it, was important to me because we were underlining one of the significant events of the 20th century. If we hadn't won this, where would we be?
Before World War II, there were a great number of very fine films which probably preconditioned a lot of our thinking about World War II and what it was going to be like. for example, What Price Glory with Victor McLaughlin. And no one ever played a Marine Sergeant better than Victor McLaughlin. This was a role that he repeated again and again. They created a stereotype, the handsome hero. This is what you wanted to be like.
This is what the war in Vietnam is all
Television and Vietnam changed that. Hollywood found it had a competitor. Suddenly, the pictures of war on the silver screen no longer fit with the pictures people saw on the evening news. Hollywood retreated. There would be no films made about Vietnam during that war, except one.
Fighting soldiers from the sky. Fearless men.
John Wayne made the Green Berets to help support the American effort in Vietnam. He wrote to Lyndon Johnson and proposed that he make a movie about the war to support the American effort there. And very clearly, it fits into the genre of wartime movies designed to promote the war effort. The problem was that he was promoting the wrong war at the wrong place at the wrong time, and he did it with no subtlety. It's almost laughable. It is stilted, and it is badly made, and Fort Benning doesn't look like Vietnam. And at the end, when he is walking on the beach with the little boy saying, "You're what it's all about," the sun is setting into the South China Sea, which of course it can't do. Hollywood made no Vietnam movies after Green Berets at the end of the war. What they did, since they wanted to make movies, they made things like Patton.
Americans love a winner and will not tolerate a loser. Americans play to win all the time.
People were really behind World War II. It was a war that was totally moral and that everybody believed in, and to this day believe in it. Whereas Vietnam was, at best, for the people that believed in it, a lost cause and a tragedy. And at worst, it was an illegal war.
John Milius wrote the first combat movie about Vietnam, Apocalypse Now. It was also the first time the military formally rejected a script, and the era of cooperation between Hollywood and the Pentagon was over for Vietnam film.
I love the smell of napalm in the morning.
Everybody loves the scene where Duvall says that he loves the smell of napalm in the morning, and quite frankly, I always thought that stuff was over the top, and I thought it would be the first thing cut from the movie. But it's funny, you know, often those of us that do write these things, you know, don't have a very clear idea of what they are.
The movie that's the worst, the one that gets me so angry that, you know, my fantasy is I'm going to get up now and leave my popcorn and walk out, and that is the movie Apocalypse Now. For years, I would tell people this movie is a very interesting movie, but it's not about Vietnam.
Ellen!
One thing I'm so envious of is the movies about my dad's war, because my dad fought in World War II, all showed that the guys who fought on our side were competent, and they knew what they were doing. When the movie Coming Home came out, the message was, at least as I saw it, the message was the opposite. Here's a veteran, he's in a wheelchair, he has to be led around by a woman, and of course the woman is Jane Fonda. I was furious. In the World War II movies, guys were standing around saying, well, you know, is the guy impotent or is he not? Is John Wayne impotent or is he not impotent?
I don't like most Vietnam War movies because they've sort of lost their, not innocence, but objectivity. They all come with a kind of axe to grind, and they don't sort of show the thing as what it was. Platoon's a very good movie because it has a very kind of harsh realism. But most of them sort of have this guilt that goes along with it.
If you go back to Sands v. Iwo Jima, John Wayne dies without any blood. Young boys watching John Wayne go up the hill and get shot and die, and it's perfectly peaceful. He's just dead. They go into Vietnam and they discover that death and dying is not like John Wayne on Mount Suribachi. The faces get blown away, arms get blown off, blood pours out. And so that was a disillusionment to the young men fighting. But to filmmakers, it was perfectly good.
Most men of my generation don't like today's war films. They say that's not the way it was. That's not the way it is for us. I would probably surprise you if I were to say that Robin Williams' Good Morning America captured Vietnam much better than Platoon.
Good morning, Vietnam!
I was interested in showing Vietnam in a non-combat situation. I was interested in showing soldiers in the city when the escalation was taking place, and to be able to show the Vietnamese not as just those that we fought, or those that were just purely, you know, the victims, but just people in a day-to-day environment.
Good Morning Vietnam is one of 33 major movies that examines that war, and it's not the last. John Milius is now directing the latest Vietnam epic, and he has gone back to the old-fashioned way of making war movies. The Navy is once again giving its assistance, and the approach is as old as Hollywood at war.
It really harkens back to a World War II movie, to sentiments where we're not trying to point out how terrible these people are for participating in this war. We're trying to point out the human problems involved with people and the better side of them, where men really kind of do maybe more than they would in peacetime, where they become bigger than themselves and give something more of themselves.